Welcome. Thank you so much for 20,000 subscribers. It means a lot. Now, what you're about to hear is just one story. But every week there are others. Ones we can't risk airing to everyone. We lock them in the vault. Only members have the key. Click join to unlock your weekly exclusive episodes just for 69 cents per month. And starting this week, the 24/7 Grim Radio will be live. All of your favorite stories airing 24/7. I've always been good with my hands. My dad taught me how engines work when I was 8, and by 12, I could take apart a carburetor blindfolded. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. And for most of my life, that was enough. That was before I moved to Evening Shade, Arkansas. 2 years ago, I was working at a dealership in Little Rock when my life fell apart. My wife of 6 years left me for her chiropractor, and the apartment we shared suddenly felt like a museum of failed promises. I needed an escape, and when my Uncle Bobby mentioned that old Pete Rollins was looking to retire and sell his garage in Evening Shade, it seemed like divine intervention. "It's nothing fancy," Uncle Bobby had said on the phone, his voice crackling through the bad connection. "But the price is right, and that little town could use someone who knows their way around an engine." I'd never even heard of Evening Shade before. A speck on the map in Sharp County with a population just shy of 400. The kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do. Where the Dairy Queen is the social hub, and where Main Street is just a handful of weathered buildings clinging to better days. I bought Pete's garage with what little savings I had, plus a loan from the Bank of Cave City. Landry's Auto Repair, I renamed it. A fresh start. The garage itself was a corrugated metal building just off Highway 167, wedged between Mabel's Diner and a feed store that had gone out of business. Inside were 2 hydraulic lifts, one working, an ancient air compressor that wheezed like an asthmatic, and enough tools to get by. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The locals were wary at first. Outsiders aren't trusted immediately in towns like Evening Shade. But cars break down regardless of who's fixing them, and slowly, I built up a reputation as fair and competent. I rented a small house on Maple Street, started attending the occasional service at First Baptist, and settled into the quiet rhythm of small-town life. That quiet rhythm shattered 3 weeks ago when Sheriff Dawkins had a '98 Honda Accord towed to my garage. "Found it abandoned out on Possum Trot Road," he'd said, leaning against my counter, his weathered face impassive beneath his hat. "No plates, no registration. Been sitting there at least a week. State says if nobody claims it in 30 days, county can sell it. Thought you might want first crack at it for parts." The car was in surprisingly good condition, dusty and low on gas, but nothing major. I might have made a decent profit parting it out, but something made me pop the trunk first. That's where I found the journal. It was a leather-bound notebook, the kind you'd find at Barnes & Noble, nothing special. No name inscribed, just a series of entries dating back 6 months. I flipped through it casually, not expecting much. Then I saw yesterday's date, and a detailed description of Mrs. Hensley bringing in her Buick with a radiator leak, and Mr. Porter's complaints about his truck's transmission, and the stray dog that wandered into my garage around lunchtime. All things that had happened exactly as described. I checked the next page. Today's date stared back at me, along with events that hadn't occurred yet. That was when I found the list of rules, written in red ink on the inside cover. Never read more than 1 day ahead. Never share the journal's contents with anyone. Never attempt to prevent what's written. Always keep the journal within 100 feet of the garage. Never write in the journal yourself. If you hear tapping from inside a vehicle at night, do not investigate alone. If a customer arrives in a black sedan after sunset, do not accept their keys. I've broken one rule already, and now I'm writing this as a warning, because what's coming was written long before I found the journal. I studied the journal for hours that first night, flipping through the worn pages under the flickering light of my desk lamp. The handwriting was tight and precise, almost mechanical in its uniformity. Nothing like my own messy scrawl. I kept returning to the rules, wondering what kind of sick joke this was. The next morning, as I unlocked the garage at 7:30 a.m., exactly as I do every weekday, I couldn't shake the uneasiness that had settled in my gut. According to the journal, I was supposed to have 3 customers today. Mrs. Holloway at 9 a.m. with a battery issue, Hank Billings at 11:45 complaining about his brakes, and someone named Marcus Coalfield at 2:30 with an overheating problem. I'd never heard of Marcus Coalfield. Mrs. Holloway pulled up in her powder blue Corolla at precisely 9:02 a.m. Her battery was indeed dead, just as the journal had predicted. I replaced it quickly. "You're a godsend, Mike," she said, handing me 2 $20 bills. Earl at the Texaco used to charge me double and take all day. I forced a smile, but my mind was racing. It could be coincidence. Mrs. Holloway's battery was old, and she'd been having issues with it for weeks. Hank Billings arrived at 11:43 a.m., 2 minutes early according to the journal. "Brakes are squealing like a stuck pig," he said as he handed me his keys. "Started yesterday on my way back from Mountain View." I nodded, trying to appear normal. "I'll check the pads and rotors." My hands trembled as I worked on Hank's F-150. The journal had been right again. This was no coincidence. I finished with Hank's truck by 1 o'clock, leaving me with 90 minutes until Marcus Coalfield was supposed to arrive. I decided to reread the journal entry for today, searching for any details I might have missed. There was an additional note I hadn't noticed. "The dog returns. Feed it or it dies tonight." I glanced out the open bay door. The stray from yesterday, a mangy brown mutt with one ear torn halfway down, was sitting in the gravel parking lot, watching me. I found some beef jerky in my lunchbox and tossed it to the dog. It sniffed cautiously before wolfing it down. At 2:27 p.m., a rusted-out Chevy Blazer I'd never seen before pulled up. A tall, gaunt man with a deeply lined face stepped out. His eyes were hidden behind reflective sunglasses, despite the overcast day. "You Landry?" he asked, his voice like sandpaper. "That's me. Name's Marcus Coalfield. Engine's been running hot." My mouth went dry. I wiped my palms on my coveralls. "Let's take a look." As I popped the hood, Marcus leaned against the wall watching me. "You're new around here. Bought old Pete's place." It wasn't a question. "Been here almost 2 years now," I replied, focusing on the engine to avoid his gaze. "Time moves different in the evening shade," he said cryptically. "You found something recently, didn't you?" My hand froze on the radiator cap. "Don't know what you mean." Marcus removed his sunglasses. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless. "Some things in this town have a way of finding the right person, or the wrong one." The coolant reservoir was bone dry, and I could see a small crack, easy enough to fix. I took my time explaining the issue to Marcus, trying to keep the conversation professional. As he paid me in crisp $20 bills, he paused. "That Honda in the back, the one Sheriff Dawkins brought in. You planning to work on it?" "Just for parts," I said carefully. Marcus nodded slowly. "Some parts aren't meant to be removed. Remember that?" After he left, I called Sheriff Dawkins. "Never heard of a Marcus Coalfield," the sheriff said. "You sure that was his name?" I hung up and went straight to the Honda. The journal was where I'd left it, tucked under the driver's seat. I flipped to tomorrow's entry. "The tapping starts tonight. Don't forget rule number 6. As I locked up the garage that evening, the stray dog followed me home. I fed it again and left a bowl of water on my porch. According to the journal, I'd named it Cassidy by tomorrow morning. In bed that night, I couldn't sleep. The journal's predictions circled in my mind like vultures. I'd started following the rules without even realizing it. I hadn't told anyone about the journal's contents, hadn't tried to prevent any of the events, and I'd only read one day ahead. But what was the tapping the journal mentioned, and why shouldn't I investigate it alone? At exactly 2:17 a.m., my phone rang. It was the security system I'd installed at the garage. Motion detection alert. I threw on clothes and grabbed my flashlight and the .38 Special. I keep in my nightstand. The drive to the garage took less than 5 minutes. The dog, Cassidy, I guess, had followed my truck and was now pacing nervously outside the garage doors. Inside, everything looked normal at first. The Honda sat where I'd left it. My tools were in their places. But then, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the back of the garage. From inside the trunk of a 2015 Dodge Charger I'd been fixing for Deputy Wilson. Tap, tap, tap. Rule number 6. If you hear tapping from inside a vehicle at night, do not investigate alone. But I was alone. The closest neighbor was half a mile away. The sheriff would take at least 15 minutes to arrive. Tap, tap, tap. I stood frozen, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. Cassidy began to growl, the hair on her back standing up. Tap, tap, tap. Louder now, more insistent. I had to look. I had to know. With trembling hands, I approached the Charger, my footsteps echoing in the silent garage. The tapping grew more frantic as I got closer. Tap, 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 tap. I placed my hand on the trunk release, and that's when all the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the garage whole. The only light came from my flashlight, its beam cutting through the blackness like a knife. My heart hammered against my ribs as I backed away from the Charger, the tapping now so violent it seemed like something was trying to punch its way out. Cassidy's growl turned into a high-pitched whine. She retreated to the open bay door, her eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. I fumbled for my phone and called Sheriff Dawkins. It rang 4 times before he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Mike? It's nearly 3 in the morning. Someone's in the trunk of Deputy Wilson's car," I interrupted. "Or something. I don't know. The power's out at the garage." There was a pause. "I'll be there in 10. Don't do anything stupid." The tapping had stopped the moment I'd called the sheriff. The silence felt more threatening than the noise had been. I trained my flashlight on the Charger, keeping my distance. The car sat motionless, innocent in appearance. My gaze wandered to the Honda where I'd found the journal. It seemed to be watching me, if a car could watch. 7 minutes later, headlights swept across the yard as Sheriff Dawkins's patrol car pulled up. He stepped out, hand resting on his holstered pistol, his face grim in the harsh glow of the headlights. "Where's this tapping coming from?" I pointed to the Charger. "It stopped when I called you." The sheriff approached the car cautiously, signaling for me to stay back. He drew his weapon before pressing the trunk release. The trunk popped open with a soft click. Empty. "There's nothing here, Mike," Sheriff Dawkins said, holstering his weapon. He shined his flashlight around the clean, empty trunk space. "But I heard it," I insisted. "Tapping. From inside." Sheriff Dawkins gave me a long look. "You been drinking tonight?" "No. I swear, Sheriff. There was something in there." He sighed and closed the trunk. "Power's probably out because of that thunderstorm rolling in from the west. Happens all the time on this stretch. You should head home, get some sleep. I'll have Deputy Wilson pick up his car tomorrow." I knew what I'd heard, but arguing would only make me sound crazier. So I nodded, locked up the garage, and followed the sheriff out. Cassidy jumped into my truck without invitation, and I was too rattled to argue. Back home, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that grew cold, Cassidy curled at my feet. The journal sat before me, open to tomorrow's entry. I read it again. A woman in a white dress will arrive at 10:15 a.m. asking about her husband's truck. Do not touch her. Jim Ellis pays his bill with exactly $287.44 in small bills. Count it twice. The black sedan appears at sunset. Rule number 7. If a customer arrives in a black sedan after sunset, do not accept their keys. Rain started pattering against the windows around 5 in the morning. By the time I opened the shop at 7:30, it was coming down in sheets. Power had been restored overnight, but the storm had knocked down branches all over town. The parking lot of my garage had transformed into a small lake. Jim Ellis arrived at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes early for his appointment, to pick up his Silverado. I'd replaced his transmission last week, a big job that had earned me a healthy profit. Drive smooth as butter now, he said, counting out a stack of crumpled bills. $287.44. He placed the coins on top with a triumphant tap. I counted the money once, then again. Exactly $287.44, just as the journal had predicted. The morning crawled by. I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for 10:15 a.m. At precisely that time, the bell over the door jingled. A woman stood in the doorway, water dripping from a white sundress that clung to her thin frame. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull, and her eyes were bloodshot from crying or lack of sleep. Maybe both. "Are you Mike Landry?" Her voice was soft, almost childlike. I nodded, remembering the journal's warning. Do not touch her. "I'm looking for my husband's truck," she said, stepping further into the shop. It's a blue Ford F-150, about 10 years old. He was supposed to pick it up yesterday. We didn't have any blue F-150s in the shop. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no vehicle matching that description here. Maybe another garage in Batesville or..." "He said it was here." Her voice had an edge now. "Hank said you were fixing it." Hank Billings. His truck was red, not blue, and he'd picked it up yesterday afternoon. "Mr. Billings collected his truck yesterday," I said carefully. "But it's red, not blue." The woman's face contorted. "Liar. He wouldn't lie to me. He promised he was coming home." She took a step toward me, her movements jerky and unnatural. That's when I noticed her feet, bare and bleeding, leaving smudges of red on my concrete floor. "Ma'am, you're hurt. Let me call someone." "He said he'd be home," she screamed, lunging across the counter at me. I stumbled backward, barely avoiding her outstretched hands. Cassidy, who'd been sleeping in the corner, was suddenly between us, barking furiously. The woman froze, staring at the dog with an expression of pure terror. Then she backed toward the door. "He'll come home," she whispered. "He always comes home eventually." She turned and ran out into the rain. By the time I reached the door, she had vanished completely. I immediately called Sheriff Dawkins. "A woman in a white dress looking for Hank Billings?" he repeated. "Mike, Hank's wife Wendy died 3 years ago. Drove off Valley Bridge during a rainstorm just like this one." My blood ran cold. "Sheriff, I swear." "Look, Mike," he interrupted, his voice gentler now. "I've known Hank for 30 years. His wife's death nearly destroyed him. If this is some kind of sick joke..." "It's not a joke," I insisted. "She was here. Check my security cameras if you don't believe me." There was a long pause. "I'll stop by later. Just maybe get some rest, all right? You're not looking too good lately." After hanging up, I checked the security footage. The cameras showed me opening the door, talking to empty air, and backing away from nothing. Cassidy barked at the empty space, and then I rushed to the door alone. But the bloody footprints were still on my floor. I spent the afternoon in a daze, working on an oil change for Mrs. Peterson's Subaru and trying to make sense of what had happened. Was I losing my mind? Or was the journal somehow changing reality? As the day wore on, dark clouds lingered, making it impossible to tell when sunset officially arrived. I kept checking the journal, rereading the entry about the black sedan. At 6:43 p.m., with rain still drumming on the metal roof, headlights cut through the gloom. A sleek black sedan pulled into my parking lot, water cascading off its polished surface. The driver remained inside for a long moment, engine idling. Then the door opened, and a man stepped out. He wore an immaculate black suit despite the downpour, not a drop of rain touching him as he approached. I glanced at Cassidy. She was pressed against the back wall, tail between her legs. The bell jingled as the man entered. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with a gaunt face and deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Mr. Landry," he said, his voice like smooth stones rolling together. "I require your assistance with my vehicle." Rule number 7 echoed in my mind. If a customer arrives in a black sedan after sunset, do not accept their keys. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "We're closed for the day. I can recommend—" "I insist," he interrupted, reaching into his pocket. He produced a set of keys attached to a keychain made from what looked like carved bone. "It's a simple matter. I merely need you to retrieve something from the trunk." The trunk. Just like the tapping from last night. "We're closed," I repeated more firmly. "I don't accept new jobs after 6. The man's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "You've been reading it, haven't you?" he asked softly. "The journal. Do you understand what you've become involved in, Mr. Landry?" I said nothing, but my silence was answer enough. "Very well," he said, returning the keys to his pocket. "I'll find someone more accommodating. But I should warn you, breaking the rules has consequences. Dire ones." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Mr. Landry? Rule number 2. You've already broken it by calling the sheriff. I'd be very careful about breaking any more." The bell jingled as he left. Through the window, I watched him return to his car and drive away. The sedan's taillights bleeding red into the rain before disappearing around the bend. I hadn't told Sheriff Dawkins about the journal. I'd only mentioned the tapping and the woman in white. Yet the man in the black sedan knew. Someone was watching me. I closed the garage early that night, my nerves too frayed to continue working. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a heavy mist that clung to everything like a shroud. Cassidy followed me home, keeping unusually close to my heels. At home, I double-checked all the locks and drew the curtains. The journal sat on my kitchen table, where I'd left it that morning. I approached it cautiously, as if it might suddenly sprout teeth and snap at me. Rule number 1. Never read more than 1 day ahead. I'd already broken rule number 2 by inadvertently telling Sheriff Dawkins about the journal's predictions. What would happen if I broke another rule? The man in the black sedan had made it clear there would be dire consequences. But I needed to understand what I was dealing with. With trembling fingers, I opened the journal and flipped past tomorrow's entry to the day after. The page was blank. I turned to the next day. Blank again. Every page beyond tomorrow was completely empty. A chill ran through me. The journal only showed predictions for the next day. Never further. I'd never actually broken rule number 1 because it was impossible to read more than 1 day ahead. I returned to tomorrow's entry. Deputy Wilson discovers something in his trunk at 9:17 a.m. The old Phillips place has a visitor. Don't follow Marcus Coalfield when he leaves at 3:46 p.m. The journal will be moved. Find it before midnight. I spent a restless night, sleeping in fits and starts. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman in the white dress, her feet leaving bloody prints across my floor. When my alarm blared at 6:30 a.m., I'd already been awake for an hour, staring at the ceiling. The streets were slick with last night's rain as I drove to the garage, Cassidy riding shotgun. The morning fog was so thick, I could barely see 20 feet ahead. The town of Evening Shade seemed to be holding its breath. I arrived at the garage at 7:15, giving myself time to clean before opening. The bloody footprints from yesterday were gone, not cleaned up, just gone. The security footage still showed me talking to empty air, but I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard. At 9:14 a.m., Deputy Wilson's patrol car pulled into the lot. He was a young guy, fresh out of the academy and eager to prove himself. He'd only been in Evening Shade for about 6 months. "Morning, Mike," he called, too cheerful for the gloomy day. "Sheriff said my car's ready?" I nodded, handing him the keys. "All fixed up. New alternator and belt. She's running smooth now." Deputy Wilson thanked me and paid his bill. As he turned to leave, I remembered the journal's prediction. Deputy Wilson discovers something in his trunk at 9:17 a.m. It was 9:16. "Deputy," I called after him. "Maybe I should check the trunk one more time, just to be sure everything's good." Wilson gave me an odd look. "It's fine, Mike. I don't keep anything in there except my spare and emergency kit." He walked out to his car and unlocked it. I followed him, trying to appear casual. Really, I should just make sure I didn't leave any tools. "I've got it," Wilson said, popping the trunk with his key fob. The lid swung up. Wilson froze. The trunk was filled with dirt. Rich, dark soil, like freshly turned grave dirt, piled high and spilling slightly over the edges. And in the center, pressed into the dirt, was a perfect handprint, too small to be an adult's. "What the hell?" Wilson whispered, taking a step back. I checked my watch. 9:17 a.m. exactly. This wasn't," I stammered. Wilson's hand moved to his service weapon. "Is this some kind of joke, Landry?" "Because it's not funny. I swear, Deputy, it wasn't me. Last night, there was a tapping coming from inside. Sheriff Dawkins checked it himself. The trunk was empty then." Wilson's face hardened. "Stay here. I'm calling this in." While the deputy called the station, I discreetly checked the journal I brought with me. The next line read, "The old Phillips place has a visitor." The Phillips place was an abandoned farmhouse about 3 miles outside of town. Old man Phillips had died there 15 years ago, and the property had been tied up in some legal dispute ever since. Local kids claimed it was haunted, a story that had never interested me much until now. Sheriff Dawkins arrived 20 minutes later, his expression thunderous. He took one look at the dirt-filled trunk and pulled me aside. "What's going on here, Mike?" he demanded, his voice low. "First the tapping, then a ghost woman, now this? You better start talking." I hesitated. Rule number 2. Never share the journal's contents with anyone. "I don't know what's happening," I said finally. "Honest, it's like something's wrong with this town. Or with me." The sheriff studied my face. "My daddy used to tell stories about Evening Shade. Said there were places here that weren't right. Things that happened that couldn't be explained." He glanced back at the car. "I always thought they were just stories." While the sheriff questioned Deputy Wilson, Marcus Colefield's Blazer pulled into my lot. He got out and approached, seemingly unbothered by the police presence. "Engine's running much better," he said, ignoring the commotion around the patrol car. "Need to talk to you about something else, though. Something private." I glanced at the sheriff, who was now taking pictures of the dirt-filled trunk. "Not a great time, Mr. Colefield." Marcus leaned closer. "It's about the Honda, and what you found in it." My blood went cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The old Phillips place," Marcus whispered. "That's where it started. That's where you'll find answers." He straightened up. "I'll be back at 3:30. We should talk more then." With that, he turned and walked back to his Blazer, starting it up and driving away as if nothing unusual was happening. The journal had warned me not to follow Marcus when he left at 3:46 p.m., but it hadn't said anything about investigating the Phillips place on my own. After the sheriff and deputy finally left, taking the dirt as evidence and leaving the charger behind for further investigation, I flipped the sign to closed and grabbed my keys. "Come on, Cassidy," I called to the dog, who had been watching everything from the safety of the garage's interior. "We're taking a drive." The Phillips farmhouse stood at the end of a long, rutted driveway, half hidden by overgrown trees and brush. The two-story clapboard structure was weathered gray, with boarded windows and a sagging porch. A collapsed barn lay in ruins behind it. I parked my truck at the end of the drive and approached cautiously, Cassidy at my side. The dog's hackles were raised, her ears alert. The front door hung partially open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Old police tape, faded to pale yellow, was still stretched across it, but had been recently torn. Someone had been here. "Hello?" I called out, instantly regretting it. The silence that followed seemed heavier, more attentive. I pushed the door open wider, wincing at the long creak of rusted hinges. The interior was dark, dust motes dancing in the few shafts of light that penetrated the boarded windows. The entryway opened to a living room on the left and what must have been a dining room on the right. Straight ahead, a staircase led to the second floor. Most of the furniture was gone, though a sagging couch remained in the living room, covered in a sheet that might once have been white. Something caught my eye on the dining room floor, fresh footprints in the dust, leading toward the kitchen at the back of the house. I followed them slowly, aware of every creak beneath my boots. Cassidy stayed close, her body tense. The kitchen was in shambles. Cabinet doors hung from broken hinges, and the linoleum floor was torn and curling. An ancient refrigerator stood open, empty except for decades-old rust. The footprints led to a door beside the refrigerator, a basement entrance. It stood open just a crack, darkness yawning beyond. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get in my truck and drive away from evening shade and never look back. But I needed answers. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam seemed weak against the basement's darkness, barely penetrating a few feet. "Stay here, girl," I told Cassidy, who whimpered but obediently sat at the top of the stairs. The wooden steps groaned under my weight as I descended. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a musty, earthy smell that reminded me of the dirt in Deputy Wilson's trunk. At the bottom, my flashlight revealed a dirt floor and stone walls. Old shelves lined one wall, holding dusty canning jars and forgotten tools. A workbench stood against another, cluttered with yellowed papers. In the center of the room was a large table. On it lay a leather-bound journal, identical to the one I'd found in the Honda. I approached it slowly, heart pounding. The journal was open to a page filled with the same neat handwriting I'd become familiar with. At the top was a list of names. Some were crossed out, others circled. My name was near the bottom, circled in red ink. Below the names was a detailed map of evening shade with certain locations marked. My garage, the Phillips place, Valley Bridge, the old cemetery, and a spot in the woods I didn't recognize. And at the bottom of the page, a single sentence. "The vessels are prepared. The doors will open when the final rule is broken." The sound of a car engine outside startled me. I quickly photographed the page with my phone and hurried back up the stairs. Cassidy was gone. "Cassidy!" I called, panic rising in my throat. Outside, I found her standing rigid at the edge of the overgrown yard, staring at a black sedan parked behind my truck. The man in the suit was leaning against it, watching the house. When he saw me, he smiled, a terrible, empty expression that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Landry," he called. "How curious to find you here. I believe you have something that belongs to me." I clutched the phone in my pocket, wondering if he knew I'd photographed the journal in the basement. "I'm just looking around," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Old houses interest me. Old houses, old stories, old rules." The man mused. "They're all connected, you see. This town has been specially prepared for a very long time." He straightened up and adjusted his suit jacket. "You should return to your garage, Mr. Landry. Marcus Coalfield will be arriving soon. I believe your journal mentioned 3:46 p.m. You wouldn't want to miss him." The journal. He knew exactly what it said. "Who are you?" I demanded. The man's smile widened. "Just a courier. Like you." He got back into his sedan and drove away, leaving me standing in the yard with Cassidy growling beside me. I checked my watch. 3:15 p.m. I had just enough time to get back to the garage before Marcus arrived. As I drove, one thought kept circling in my mind. I'd never told anyone about the journal, yet both Marcus and the man in the sedan knew about it. They knew the rules, and they were watching to see which ones I would break next. I made it back to the garage at 3:41 p.m., tires kicking up gravel as I skidded into the lot. Cassidy leaped from the truck before I'd fully stopped, her nose to the ground, circling the building as if searching for something. The Honda sat where it had been since Sheriff Dawkins towed it in. I went straight to it and checked under the driver's seat. The journal was still there, exactly as I'd left it. "The journal will be moved. Find it before midnight." Who would move it? Marcus? The man in the sedan? And what would happen if I didn't find it in time? At precisely 3:46 p.m., Marcus Coalfield's Blazer pulled into the lot. He got out slowly, his movements deliberate, and approached me with a grim expression. "You went to the Phillips place," he said. It wasn't a question. "How do you know about the journal?" I countered, unwilling to play games anymore. Marcus glanced around the empty lot before answering. "Because I had it before you, and someone else had it before me." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "What is it? Some kind of curse?" "Not a curse, a job." Marcus leaned against the garage wall, suddenly looking exhausted. "The journal chooses its keeper. It moves from person to person when certain conditions are met." "What conditions?" He shook his head. "I can't tell you that. It's part of the rules." "The rules in the journal? Who made them?" "They've always been there, since the beginning." Marcus straightened up. "Look, I didn't come to give you answers. I came to warn you. They're watching you now. The couriers. They're always around when a new keeper is testing boundaries." "The man in the black sedan called himself a courier," I said. Marcus's face paled. "You spoke to one directly?" "That's unusual. They typically stay in the shadows." "Who are they? What do they want?" "They make sure the rules are followed. That's all I know." He paused, seeming to debate something internally. "The Phillips place. Did you find anything there?" I thought about the journal in the basement, the list of names. My name circled in red. "Nothing," I lied. "Just an empty old house." Marcus studied my face for a long moment. "I think you did find something, and I think you're smart enough not to tell me about it." He pushed off from the wall. "That's good. Trust no one in Evening Shade, especially not those who know about the journal." "Including you?" I asked. A sad smile crossed his face. "Especially me." He turned to leave, then stopped. "One last thing. When you find the journal tonight, and you will need to find it, there will be a new rule written on the back cover. Don't ignore it." With that, he walked to his Blazer and drove away. The journal had warned me not to follow him, so I stayed put, watching until his taillights disappeared around the bend. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog, going through the motions of cleaning up the garage and finishing paperwork. At 5:30 p.m., I locked up and drove home, the journal tucked safely in my jacket pocket. Cassidy rode in silence beside me, occasionally whining softly. At home, I placed the journal on the kitchen table and began making dinner, a simple sandwich I barely tasted. My appetite had vanished days ago, replaced by a constant gnawing anxiety. I kept checking the journal every few minutes, expecting it to vanish before my eyes. But it remained in place, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in its implications. After dinner, I showered and tried to relax, but sleep was impossible. I paced my small living room, checking the locks repeatedly. Cassidy watched me from her spot on the couch, her eyes following my movements. At 11:17 p.m., someone knocked on my front door. 3 sharp raps, then silence. Cassidy bolted upright, a growl rumbling in her throat. I froze, listening. No car engine, no footsteps on the porch, nothing but the soft chirping of crickets outside. The knock came again. 3 raps, more insistent this time. I crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. The porch was empty. No car in the driveway, no figure retreating down the path. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. The idiot who opens the door and gets slaughtered. But I remembered Marcus's words. They're watching you now. Was this some kind of test? I opened the door a crack, chain still latched. Nothing. Just the empty porch and the darkness beyond. Then I looked down. A child's doll sat on my welcome mat. It was old, with a porcelain face and faded cloth body. One glass eye was missing, and its dress was stained with what looked like mud or blood. In its cloth arms, it held the journal. My hand flew to my jacket pocket, where I'd placed the journal earlier. Empty. The journal will be moved. Find it before midnight. It was 11:22 p.m. I had less than 40 minutes. I unlatched the chain and opened the door wider, scanning the yard for movement. Nothing stirred in the Arkansas night. Keeping one foot inside the doorway, I bent down and carefully picked up the doll. Its remaining eye seemed to track my movement, though I told myself it was just a trick of the light. I extracted the journal from the doll's arms and quickly retreated inside, locking the door behind me. The doll I left on the porch. Whatever game was being played, I wanted no part of that thing in my house. Heart pounding, I opened the journal to tomorrow's entry. The doll will be gone by morning. Sheriff Dawkins brings bad news at 10:33 a.m. Do not go to Valley Bridge alone. Hank Billings knows more than he admits. The tapping returns louder than before. I flipped to the back cover as Marcus had instructed. There, in red ink that hadn't been there before, was a new rule. Rule number 8. If you see your own name written in the journal, burn it immediately. I thought of the journal in the Phillips Place basement, with my name circled in red on the list. Did this rule mean I should burn that journal? Or this one? And what would happen if I burned this journal? Would the curse, or job, as Marcus called it, end? Or would that be breaking a rule with dire consequences? I checked the time. 11:40 p.m. 20 minutes until midnight. I needed to think clearly. The journal contained predictions that came true. It had rules that seemed to protect its keeper. Don't read ahead, don't share its contents, don't let it out of proximity to the garage, don't investigate tapping alone, don't accept keys from the black sedan. These weren't arbitrary restrictions, they were warnings. But what about rule number 3? Never attempt to prevent what's written. That rule troubled me the most. The journal predicted events, but was I merely witnessing them or somehow causing them by following the journal's instructions? And now rule number 8, demanding I burn the journal if I saw my name written in it. My name had been on that list in the basement. Was that what triggered this new rule? As if reading my thoughts, Cassidy began to bark at the front door. I turned to see the knob slowly turning, though I'd locked it moments before. I backed away, grabbing a heavy wrench from my tool bag by the couch. The door stopped moving, the lock holding. Then the knocking began again. Not 3 raps this time, but continuous, growing louder and more frantic. It spread from the door to the windows, to the walls, the ceiling, as if dozens of fists were pounding to get in. Cassidy's barking turned to whimpering. She retreated to the hallway, tail between her legs. The knocking reached a deafening crescendo, then stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, my phone chimed, a text message from an unknown number. Midnight approaches, decide. It was 11:58 p.m. The journal felt heavy in my hands. I thought about Marcus, about the man in the sedan, about the woman in white, and the dirt in Deputy Wilson's trunk. Most of all, I thought about the list of names in the basement journal. Names crossed out, names circled, my name circled in red. The vessels are prepared. The doors will open when the final rule is broken. At 11:59 p.m., I made my decision. I placed the journal on the kitchen table and opened it to the first blank page after tomorrow's entry. Taking a deep breath, I picked up a pen. Rule number 5, never write in the journal yourself. The clock on the wall ticked over to midnight as my pen touched the paper. The moment my pen touched the paper, the lights in my house went out. Not just flickered, they exploded, sending shards of glass raining down from the fixtures. I ducked, shielding my eyes. In the sudden darkness, the journal began to change. The leather binding grew warm beneath my fingers, then hot, forcing me to pull my hand away. A faint red glow emanated from the pages, illuminating my kitchen with a bloody hue. Words appeared on the blank page, bleeding upward from the paper, as if written by an invisible hand. Rule broken. Consequence initiated. The glow intensified, spreading from the journal to my hands, up my arms. It didn't burn, but it sent pins and needles racing through my body, like my blood had been replaced with static electricity. Cassidy began to howl from somewhere in the house, a sound so mournful it raised the hair on the back of my neck. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The journal closed itself with a soft thump. The glow faded. In the darkness, I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The journal looked exactly as it had before, ordinary and innocuous on my kitchen table. But when I tried to pick it up, my hands passed through it as if it were a hologram. I swiped at it repeatedly, but my fingers met on the air where the solid book should have been. Yet it remained there, clearly visible in my flashlight beam. A noise from outside drew my attention, the distinctive rumble of an engine I'd come to dread. I moved to the window and peered through the curtains. The black sedan was parked at my curb, its headlights off. The driver's door opened, and the man in the suit stepped out. He looked directly at my window and smiled, as if he could see me through the curtains and darkness. He raised his hand, revealed a key, and pointed it at my door. I backed away, fumbling for my phone to call Sheriff Dawkins. Before I could dial, the screen went black, not powered off. The glass itself turned black, as if filled with ink that spread to cover my hand, my arm, creeping upward. Panic surged through me. I dropped the phone and rubbed frantically at my skin, but the blackness remained, climbing higher, reaching my shoulder. Cassidy appeared from the hallway, her hackles raised. She growled at something behind me. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. The man in the suit stood in my kitchen, though the door remained locked. He looked at me with eyes that reflected no light, then at the journal on the table. "You surprise me, Mr. Landry," he said, his voice emotionless. Most wait much longer before breaking Rule 5. You're impulsive. The blackness had spread to my chest now, a cold numbness following in its wake. I could barely feel my arm anymore. What's happening to me? I managed, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the terror coursing through me. Consequence, he replied simply. Each rule broken brings change. You are becoming a vessel, just as those before you. A vessel for what? The man adjusted his suit cuffs, a strangely human gesture for a being I was increasingly certain wasn't human at all. For us, for the couriers, we cannot exist here without accommodation. He glanced at the journal. The journal prepares the keeper. The rules protect both keeper and courier until the preparation is complete. I thought of the list in the basement. Names crossed out. Names circled. The others on the list, I said, struggling to speak as the numbness reached my throat. What happened to them? Some served their purpose. Others resisted too long. The vessels must be willing, at least in part. He studied me. The blackness will recede by morning, a temporary consequence, a taste of what's to come. He moved to the journal and passed his hand over it. The book solidified once more. He picked it up and placed it in my numb, blackened hand, curling my fingers around it. Continue your duties, keeper. Follow the remaining rules. When you are ready, we will complete the transition. With that, he turned and walked through my wall, not crashing through it, but passing through solid matter as if it were mist. I sank to the floor, the journal clutched in my unfeeling hand, and waited for dawn. Morning found me still on the kitchen floor, Cassidy curled protectively against my side. The blackness had receded as promised, leaving behind a pattern of faint, vein-like markings on my skin, barely visible except in certain light like old scars. I examined the journal. Today's entry remained unchanged. The doll will be gone by morning. Sheriff Dawkins brings bad news at 10:33 a.m. Do not go to Valley Bridge alone. Hank Billings knows more than he admits. The tapping returns louder than before. I checked my front porch. The doll was gone, not even indentations in the welcome mat to prove it had ever been there. I drove to the garage in a daze, Cassidy riding shotgun as usual. The sky was overcast, threatening rain again. Evening shade seemed eerily quiet, as if the whole town was holding its breath. At 10:33 a.m. exactly, Sheriff Dawkins's patrol car pulled up. One look at his face told me the news wasn't good. "Morning, Mike," he said, removing his hat as he entered. Dark circles underlined his eyes, and his normally neat uniform was rumpled, as if he'd been wearing it for days. "What's happened?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "It's Marcus Coalfield," the sheriff said heavily. "Found his blazer this morning at the bottom of Valley Bridge. Looks like he went off the edge sometime last night." My heart sank. Was he? No body yet. Current's strong after all that rain. Might be days before we find him, if ever. Sheriff Dawkins rubbed his hand across his face. Thing is, there were no skid marks, no signs of brake failure, just drove straight through the guardrail. The journal's warning echoed in my mind. Do not go to Valley Bridge alone. You knew him, right? The sheriff continued. He was here yesterday afternoon. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. He brought his car in for repairs a couple times. Didn't know him well. Sheriff Dawkins studied me for a moment. You look like hell, Mike. You feeling all right? The markings on my arm seemed to pulse beneath my shirt sleeve. Just haven't been sleeping well. Joined the club. The sheriff put his hat back on. This town, something's not right lately. Had 3 missing persons reports in the past month. More in the last year than the previous 10 combined. I've thought of the list of names in the basement journal. Anyone from around here? That's just it. They're all newcomers. Folks who moved to Evening Shade in the last couple years. He fixed me with a searching look. People like you, Mike. A chill ran through me. You think there's some connection? I think Evening Shade keeps its secrets well. Sheriff Dawkins headed for the door. Watch yourself, Mike. And call me if you remember anything about Coalfield that might help. After he left, I checked the journal again. The next line jumped out at me. Hank Billings knows more than he admits. Hank Billings, whose wife had supposedly died driving off Valley Bridge 3 years ago, the same bridge where Marcus had gone off last night. The same spot the woman in white had been looking for her husband. I glanced at the clock, 11:15 a.m. Hank usually stopped by Jackson's Feed and Hardware around lunchtime for coffee with the other old-timers. If I hurried, I could catch him there. Jackson's was only a 5-minute drive from my garage, a squat brick building that sold everything from tractor parts to penny candy. Inside, the store smelled of leather, fertilizer, and fresh coffee. Sure enough, Hank was there, seated at the small table in the corner with 3 other men I recognized as regulars. He looked up when the bell above the door announced my entrance. A flicker of something, recognition, fear, crossing his weathered face. Mike Landry, he called, his voice overly hearty. Don't often see you in here. Car troubles? The other men chuckled. I approached their table, noticing how Hank's smile didn't reach his eyes. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something, Hank. Got a minute? Hank's expression hardened slightly, but he nodded. Sure, son. Step outside with me while I have a smoke. Outside, Hank lit a cigarette with hands that trembled slightly. He didn't speak, waiting for me to break the silence. Sheriff told me about Marcus Coalfield, I said finally. Went off Valley Bridge last night. Hank took a long drag, eyes fixed on something in the distance. Shame. Didn't know him well. Thing is, I think you did, I pressed. And I think you know about the journal, too. The cigarette froze halfway to his lips. When he looked at me, his face had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Keep your voice down, he hissed, glancing around the empty parking lot. You got one, men? Christ, I thought they'd stopped. The journals? There are more? Hank's laugh was bitter. There's only one. It just moves around. Finds people who are suitable. Like your wife? I asked softly. The color drained from his face. Who told you about Wendy? A woman came to my garage looking for you, in a white dress. Hank stubbed out his cigarette with shaking fingers. That wasn't Wendy, he said flatly. My wife died 3 years ago. Car accident. At Valley Bridge. He nodded, eyes haunted. She had the journal for a while. Thought it was just a diary at first, writing down her predictions. She was always intuitive like that. His voice broke. Then she started seeing things, hearing things. Found her sleepwalking, writing in that book in handwriting that wasn't hers. What happened? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. She broke a rule. I don't know which one. I just know she changed after that. Hank looked at me directly. Her eyes started turning black. Not just the iris, the whole eye. And her skin there were marks, like tattoos that appeared overnight. I thought of the black substance that had crawled up my arm, the vein-like markings it had left behind. The night she died, Hank continued, she told me she had to go to the bridge, that they were waiting for her there. I tried to stop her, but he swallowed hard. They never found her body, just the car, her purse, her wedding ring on the seat. And the journal? Gone. Figured it went into the river with her. Hank lit another cigarette. Until about 6 months later when Pete Rollins started acting strange. Then Pete sold his garage to you and left town suddenly. Now Marcus goes off the same bridge. He studied my face. How many rules have you broken so far? Just one, I admitted. I rode in it last night. Hank's eyes widened. Jesus, Mike. You need to get rid of that thing. Burn it. Bury it. Drive it out of town. I tried to touch it after the rule broke. My hand went right through it. But the courier could touch it. The who? The courier, man in a black suit, drives a sedan. He said the journal prepares the keeper to become a vessel. Hank's face went ashen. Never saw any man in a suit. But Wendy at the end, she said the journal was preparing her, that the rules were there to keep the keeper safe until they were ready. Ready for what? I don't know. Hank crushed his half-smoked cigarette under his boot. But you need to leave Evening Shade, Mike, today. Now just get in your truck and drive until this town is a bad memory. I thought of rule number 4. Always keep the journal within 100 feet of the garage. I can't, I said. The journal has to stay near the garage, and I think I'm bound to it now somehow. Hank looked at me with genuine pity. Then God help you, son, because no one in Evening Shade can. As if to punctuate his warning, thunder rumbled overhead. Fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour. Hank retreated to the hardware store without another word, leaving me standing in the rain, the weight of his story pressing down on me. By the time I returned to the garage, I was soaked to the skin and thoroughly shaken. Cassidy greeted me at the door, her presence a small comfort in the growing nightmare. I checked the journal. The final line of today's entry seemed to pulse on the page. The tapping returns louder than before. As if on cue, I heard it. A frantic, desperate tapping coming from the back of the garage. From inside the trunk of the Honda where I had found the journal. Tap, 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 tap. I approached slowly, Cassidy growling at my side. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was inside knew I was listening. Tap, 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 tap. Rule number 6. If you hear tapping from inside a vehicle at night, do not investigate alone. But it wasn't night yet, and after everything I'd learned, I needed answers more than safety. I popped the trunk. Inside, curled in a fetal position, was Marcus Coldfield. His clothes were soaked, his skin pale and waxy. When he opened his eyes, they were completely black, bottomless pools that reflected nothing. "You broke a rule," he whispered, his voice gurgling as if he were still submerged. "Now we're both vessels, and the doors are opening." He reached for me with a hand that wasn't entirely solid, his fingers elongating as they stretched toward my face. I stumbled backward, crashing into a workbench. Tools clattered to the floor. Marcus, or what had once been Marcus, rose from the trunk, his body moving in ways that defied anatomy. His neck twisted at an impossible angle, head rotating to keep those black eyes fixed on me. "They're coming," he hissed, water spilling from his mouth with each word. "The couriers are coming through, and we're their doorways." Behind him, the air in the garage began to ripple and distort, like heat waves over hot asphalt. The ripples took shape, vaguely humanoid figures in dark suits, dozens of them, emerging from nothing. I ran, Cassidy at my heels, out into the pouring rain. Behind us, the garage filled with shadows that had never known light, and the sound of Marcus's laughter followed us into the storm. The rain hammered down as I sprinted to my truck, fumbling with the keys. Behind me, the garage door flew open, slamming against the wall. The shadows were spreading, seeping out into the rain like oil on water. I managed to get the truck started, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. Cassidy huddled on the passenger seat, whimpering. I didn't blame her. Where could I go? Home wasn't safe. The courier had walked through my walls as easily as air. The sheriff? What could I tell him? That the town was being invaded by beings from somewhere else, using people as vessels. I needed the journal. Despite everything, it had been trying to warn me, guide me through the rules. But the journal was still in the garage, surrounded by those things. As I drove aimlessly through the rain-slick streets of evening shade, a realization struck me. Valley Bridge. The journal had warned me not to go there alone. Wendy Billings had driven off it. Now Marcus. There was a connection. I turned onto Highway 167, heading north toward the bridge. Cassidy growled, sensing my intention. "It's okay, girl," I said, not believing it myself. "We need answers." Valley Bridge wasn't much to look at. A simple concrete structure spanning a deep ravine where the White River cut through the limestone. In the valley below, the river churned brown and angry, swollen with recent rains. Yellow police tape fluttered from the broken guardrail where Marcus's blazer had gone through. I parked a safe distance away and got out, the rain immediately soaking through my already damp clothes. Cassidy refused to leave the truck. The bridge was deserted, the weather keeping most people indoors. I approached the damaged section carefully, peering over the edge. The drop was at least 60 feet to the raging water below. Even if someone survived the impact, the current would make survival unlikely. Something caught my eye, a flash of white among the rocks at the river's edge. I squinted through the rain. It looked like fabric, a dress. I needed to get down there. A steep trail wound down from the roadside to the valley below, used by local fishermen to access the river. It was treacherous in this weather, mud slipping beneath my boots, but I managed to pick my way down, holding on to saplings and exposed roots. By the time I reached the valley floor, I was covered in mud and scratches. The river roared 20 feet away, its banks swollen, threatening to overflow. I made my way along the edge, searching for the white fabric I'd spotted from above. The rain made it difficult to see clearly, but eventually I found it. A white dress snagged on a fallen tree branch, half submerged in the water. I waded in carefully, the cold current immediately numbing my legs. The fabric was silk, now translucent with water. A woman's dress, torn and weathered from its time in the river. Wendy Billings' dress? It seemed impossible it could have survived 3 years in the water. As I reached for it, my fingers brushed something solid beneath the surface. I bent down, feeling blindly in the murky water. My hand closed around a book. I pulled it from the river, a leather-bound journal, identical to the one in my garage. Its pages should have been ruined by the water, but when I opened it, they were perfectly dry, the handwriting crisp and clear. The first entry was dated 3 years ago, the day Wendy Billings died. A sound behind me made me turn. Standing on the bank was the woman in white, the one who had come to my garage looking for Hank. Up close, her features were more distinct despite the rain. She was beautiful in a ghostly way, her pale skin almost translucent, her dark hair plastered to her skull by the downpour. "You found it," she said, her voice somehow audible over the roaring river. I knew someone would eventually. "Wendy," I called, wading back toward shore. The journal clutched to my chest. She tilted her head, the movement too fluid, too far. Sometimes, parts of her remain, the vessel retains echoes. I reached the bank and stood a few feet from her, shivering from cold and fear. "You're a courier." "Not yet. Almost." She looked at the journal in my hands. "I was like you once, a keeper. I followed the rules until I couldn't anymore." "What are the couriers? What do they want?" "To come through, to exist here." She gestured vaguely at her body. "They need vessels prepared by the journal. People who have seen beyond. broken the veils between worlds. By breaking the rules, I said, understanding dawning. Each broken rule thins the barrier. She nodded, an unsettling smile forming. The final rule is the door. Once 7 are broken, it opens fully. I thought of the marks on my skin, the blackness that had invaded my body after breaking just one rule. Why evening shade? Why here? This place has always been thin. The Shawnee knew it. Then the settlers, places where worlds touch. She stepped closer, water running down her face like tears. Evening shade was built on purpose, Mr. Landry, built to be a doorway. I backed away, but my heel caught on a rock, sending me stumbling. The journal fell from my hands, landing open on the muddy ground. Wendy, or the thing wearing her face, stared at it hungrily. "He's broken one rule already," she whispered as if speaking to someone I couldn't see. "The others will follow soon." I snatched up the journal and ran, splashing through the shallows, scrambling up the muddy path toward the bridge. Behind me, Wendy's laughter mingled with the sound of the rain and river. By the time I reached my truck, she was gone. Cassidy pressed against the door, relieved to see me. I climbed in, dripping water and mud everywhere, and placed the river journal on the seat between us. I had 2 journals now, the one from the garage, currently surrounded by couriers, and this one from the river. What did that mean? Were they somehow connected? I opened the river journal to its last entry. The date was today. The keeper has the second journal now. The final phase begins. All rules will be broken by midnight. The first vessel calls to the others at the garage. The doorway widens. My blood ran cold. The garage, the shadow figures emerging behind Marcus. I needed to get back there to try to stop whatever was happening. But how? What could I do against entities that could walk through walls? The answer came from an unexpected source. My phone rang. Sheriff Dawkins. "Mike," he said without preamble, "something's happening at your garage. Multiple reports of strange lights, people going in and not coming out. I'm on my way there now." "Sheriff, wait," I said urgently. "Don't go inside. It's not safe." "What's going on, Mike?" "You know something about this?" I hesitated. Rule number 2. Never share the journal's contents with anyone. But I'd already broken one rule, and the sheriff's life was in danger. "It's the journal," I said, "the one I found in that Honda. It's changing people, creating doorways for something to come through." There was a long silence. "Are you talking about Marcus Caulfield and the dirt in Wilson's trunk?" "And Wendy Billings," I added. "She didn't die in that accident, Sheriff. She changed into something else, like Marcus is changing." Another pause. "Where are you now?" "Valley Bridge. I found another journal in the river. It's connected somehow." "Stay there," Sheriff Dawkins ordered. "I'm bringing Deputy Wilson, and we'll meet you. Don't go near that garage." He hung up before I could respond. I stared at the 2 journals, the one from the river and my phone displaying the sheriff's call. I'd just broken rule number 2. What would the consequence be? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The vein-like markings on my arm began to throb, then spread, growing darker and more pronounced. They crawled up my neck, across my face. I could feel them moving beneath my skin like living things. I looked in the rearview mirror and barely recognized myself. The marks formed elaborate patterns, almost like circuit boards, covering every visible inch of skin. My eyes had darkened, the whites now gray, the irises expanded. The first rule's breaking had started the transformation, the second accelerated it. How many more until I was like Marcus, like Wendy, a vessel for the couriers to inhabit? I knew I should wait for the sheriff, but something told me time was running out. The journal had said all rules would be broken by midnight. It was already past 6. I started the truck and drove toward town, toward my garage. Cassidy whined in protest, but settled when I placed my hand, now covered in strange, shifting marks, on her head. The rain had stopped by the time I pulled up a block from the garage. Even from here, I could see something was wrong. The building glowed from within, pulsing with an otherworldly light that seeped through every crack and seam. Cars were parked haphazardly in front, Sheriff Dawkins's cruiser among them. He hadn't waited for me. I approached cautiously, the river journal tucked into my jacket. Through the windows, I could see figures moving inside, some human, others decidedly not. Their elongated forms twisted and bent in ways that defied anatomy. The main door was ajar. I peered inside. The garage had transformed. The concrete floor was cracked, dark liquid seeping upward rather than down. The walls rippled like fabric in a breeze, and everywhere people stood motionless. Deputy Wilson, Sheriff Dawkins, Mrs. Holloway, even old Pete Rollins, who I thought had left town. Their eyes were black, their skin marked with the same patterns now covering my own face and hands. In the center stood Marcus, no longer even remotely human. His body had elongated, limbs bending at impossible angles. Beside him was Wendy Billings, somehow arriving before me, and around them, more couriers in their dark suits, emerging from thin air. One of them, the one I'd spoken to, turned toward the door and saw me. A smile split his face, too wide, revealing teeth like obsidian needles. "The final keeper arrives," he announced, with the second journal as foretold. All eyes turned to me, black and hungry. "The circle nears completion," the courier continued. 6 rules broken. 1 remains. 6? I'd only broken 2. Then I realized, these weren't just my rules. Every keeper had their own set. Wendy had broken some, Marcus too, Pete Rollins. Each vessel had contributed to opening the door, and I held the final key. The courier extended his hand. "Bring us the journal, keeper. Complete your transformation, become the gateway." Behind me, Cassidy growled. She'd followed me from the truck, loyal to the end. I took a step backward. "And if I refuse?" The courier's smile widened impossibly. "Then we take it, along with your vessel. The willing are rewarded with consciousness during the transition. The unwilling..." He gestured to Sheriff Dawkins, whose face was frozen in a silent scream, eyes black and vacant. "They experience every moment of their unmaking." I clutched the river journal tighter. What happens if all the rules are broken? What comes through? "We do," the courier replied simply. "All of us. This town becomes our foothold, then the next and the next. An invasion, using human vessels as their vehicles." I looked at the transformed townspeople, at Marcus and Wendy, at the nightmare my garage had become, then down at the journal in my hands. Rule number 8. If you see your own name written in the journal, burn it immediately. I'd seen my name in the basement journal, circled in red. The courier took a step toward me. "Your choice, keeper." Willingly or not, the final rule will break tonight. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I just hoped I was right about which journal needed burning. I backed further away from the garage, mind racing. If I burned the river journal, would that stop what was happening? Or would it accelerate it? The rules had protected me in their own twisted way. Each one broken had pushed me further along the path to becoming a vessel. The courier stepped through the doorway, his movements fluid yet wrong, like watching film played at slightly the wrong speed. Behind him, the others began to follow. Marcus, Wendy, more of the dark-suited figures. "You cannot run, keeper," the courier called. "Evening shade is ours now. There is nowhere to go." I glanced at my truck. Could I make it? Drive away? Leave this nightmare behind? But even as the thought formed, I knew it was impossible. The journal bound me to this place, to this moment. My gaze fell on the gas pumps at the edge of my property, relics from when the garage had been a full-service station decades ago. They haven't worked in years, but the underground tanks were never properly removed. Pete had told me they still contained fuel, which was why he'd sealed them off rather than paying for proper disposal. An idea formed. Desperate, likely suicidal, but the only option I could see. I whistled for Cassidy and ran toward my truck. Behind me, the procession of couriers and vessels moved with unnatural speed, closing the gap. I reached the truck and fumbled with the keys, dropping them in the mud. As I bent to retrieve them, a hand landed on my shoulder, cold, heavy, with too many joints in the fingers. The journal. Marcus's distorted voice hissed in my ear. "Give it to us now." I spun, swinging blindly. My fist connected with something both solid and not, like punching wet clay. Marcus made a sound between a laugh and a gurgle, his transformed face splitting into a grin that extended to where his ears should have been. Cassidy lunged, teeth bared, clamping down on what had once been Marcus's leg. He screeched, a sound no human throat could make, and released me, swatting at the dog. I used the distraction to grab my keys and wrench open the truck door. The river journal fell into the mud. I snatched it up and threw it onto the seat, then grabbed something else from the glove box. The emergency flares I always kept there. Marcus had disentangled himself from Cassidy, who retreated to my side, bleeding from a gash in her shoulder where his two sharp fingers had caught her. The couriers were closing in, a dozen or more now, their black eyes fixed on me. Among them, I recognized faces. Mrs. Peterson, Jim Ellis, Hank Billings, all transformed, all vessels now. I needed to get to the pumps. "Cassidy, truck," I commanded. The dog jumped into the cab obediently. I closed the door to keep her safe, then faced the approaching couriers. The one in the suit, the first one I'd met, stepped forward. "It ends here, Keeper. The final rule will break. The door will open fully." "You're right about one thing," I said, backing toward the pumps. "It ends here." I lit the first flare, its harsh red glow illuminating the altered landscape of my garage. The couriers hesitated, something like uncertainty crossing their not quite human faces. "What are you doing?" the lead courier demanded, the first trace of emotion, fear, entering his voice. I didn't answer. Instead, I threw the flare as hard as I could at the garage's main window. It crashed through, landing inside among the transformed townspeople and the rippling, distorted reality they inhabited. The couriers surged forward. I lit a second flare and ran for the pumps. The caps had been welded shut years ago, but the old metal was rusted and weak. I smashed at it with a rock I found nearby, the couriers just steps behind me. The cap gave way with a screech of protest. The smell of old gasoline wafted up, still potent after all these years. "Stop him!" the lead courier shrieked, his voice distorting into something inhuman. I took the river journal from my pocket, the one I'd found where Wendy Billings had transformed, the one that had called me to Valley Bridge. Rule number 8. If you see your own name written in the journal, burn it immediately. My name had been written in a journal in the Phillips Place basement. Not this one. But they were connected, all part of the same system. The journal wasn't just predicting events. It was orchestrating them, creating the circumstances for rules to be broken, for vessels to be prepared. I tossed the flare into the open tank. For a moment, nothing happened. The couriers were almost upon me, their elongated limbs reaching, black eyes wide with rage. Then the world exploded. The force of the blast threw me backward. Heat seared my face, my arms. The ancient gas tank erupted in a fireball that engulfed the pumps and spread rapidly to the garage. The river journal, still in my hand, began to burn, not from the explosion, but from within, as if my decision had ignited it. The pages blackened and curled, words becoming ash. The couriers screamed, a sound like tearing metal and breaking glass combined. They convulsed, their forms shifting, melting like wax figures in the growing inferno. Through the flames, I saw the garage begin to collapse. The doorway they'd created was destabilizing, reality reasserting itself. The vessels, the townspeople they'd transformed, dropped to the ground, puppets with cut strings. I scrambled toward my truck, the journal in my hand now completely engulfed in supernatural flames that didn't burn my skin despite their intensity. As it disintegrated, I felt the marks on my body receding, the transformation reversing. I reached the truck and yanked open the door. Cassidy was waiting, anxious but unharmed. I started the engine and reversed away from the spreading fire, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. In the rearview mirror, I watched my garage become an inferno. The couriers were gone, banished back to wherever they'd come from, or destroyed, I couldn't tell. The vessels lay motionless on the ground outside the garage, human once more, though whether alive or dead, I didn't know. I should have stayed, should have tried to help. But something deeper than fear drove me to keep driving. A certainty that this wasn't over. That evening shade itself was part of the equation, built to be a doorway, as Wendy had said. I headed for the town limits, Cassidy whimpering beside me. The journal had completely disintegrated, leaving only a fine black ash that swirled in the cabin before disappearing. As we approached the now leaving evening shade sign, I felt a pressure building in my ears, like driving up a mountain. The truck began to labor, struggling against some invisible force. Rule number 4, always keep the journal within 100 feet of the garage, but the journal was gone, burned. I followed rule number 8, destroyed it after seeing my name. Why was I still bound? The pressure increased as we neared the town line. Blood began to trickle from my nose, from Cassidy's ears. The windows of the truck groaned, hairline cracks spreading across the glass. I wasn't going to make it. Evening shade wouldn't let me leave. Just as I was about to give up, to turn back, headlights appeared behind me, a car approaching fast. In my mirror, I recognized Sheriff Dawkins's patrol car. It pulled alongside me, and through the window, I could see the sheriff himself, bloody but alive, gesturing frantically for me to keep going. Together, we pushed toward the town line, our vehicles shuddering with the strain. The invisible barrier fought back, the pressure now so intense I could barely remain conscious. Sheriff Dawkins rolled down his window, shouting something I couldn't hear. He held up what looked like a piece of leather, a fragment of the journal from my garage, unburned somehow. He flung it from his car, back toward the center of town. The effect was immediate. The pressure vanished like a popped bubble. My truck surged forward, suddenly free, crossing the town line with a jolt I felt in my bones. I pulled over on the shoulder, gasping for breath, wiping blood from my face. The sheriff stopped beside me, stumbling out of his patrol car. "You did it," he said, his voice hoarse. "You closed the door." "How?" I croaked, my throat raw from smoke and screaming I didn't remember doing. "The journals. They're connected, like you said. When one burned, it weakened the others." Sheriff Dawkins leaned against my truck, clearly exhausted. "I woke up when the garage exploded. Found that piece of the journal next to me. Somehow knew you'd need it." "The others? Mrs. Peterson? Hank? Deputy Wilson?" Most were starting to wake up when I left. Confused, hurt, but human. He looked back toward town, where a glow from the garage fire still lit the night sky. "Whatever you did, it worked." "For now," I said, the certainty growing within me. "But Evening Shade was built for this, Sheriff. built to be a doorway, as long as it exists. Sheriff Dawkins nodded grimly. I know. That's why I'm not going back. He gestured to his patrol car, where I could see bags packed in the back seat. I've called him the fire, reported a gas explosion. State authorities will handle it. As for me, I think it's time for a fresh start somewhere far from here. I understood completely. What about the others? They'll either leave too, once they remember what happened, or... He shrugged. They'll stay. Become part of it again. That town has a way of making people forget the darkness beneath. We stood in silence for a moment, two escapees from a nightmare that few would believe. Where will you go? Sheriff Dawkins finally asked. I looked down at my arms, where the marks had faded but not disappeared entirely. Scars now, a permanent reminder. Nowhere with old buildings or strange histories. Somewhere new, somewhere normal. The sheriff laughed, a hollow sound. If you find it, let me know. We parted ways there, on the dark highway outside evening shade. Sheriff Dawkins headed east, while I turned west, Cassidy by my side, the glow of the burning garage fading in my rearview mirror. I drove through the night, putting as much distance as possible between me and that cursed town. But no matter how far I traveled, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still connected to what had happened, that the transformation hadn't fully reversed. Sometimes, when I glance in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of something in my eyes, a darkness that wasn't there before, and occasionally, in my dreams, I hear the tapping, soft at first, then louder. Tap, 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 coming from inside me now. 6 months have passed since I fled Evening Shade. I've settled in Tucson, Arizona, a place with no covered bridges, no forgotten farmhouses, no centuries of secrets buried in the soil. Just desert, stretching endlessly under a merciless sun that burns away shadows. I found work at a modern dealership, all glass and chrome and computers that diagnose engines without human intuition. It's soulless work. But that's what I wanted. Something without mystery or history. Cassidy stays close, always watching, as if she expects the darkness to return at any moment. The wound on her shoulder healed into a starburst scar, matching the faded circuit-like patterns still visible on my skin when the light hits just right. I've tried to put it all behind me, to forget Evening Shade and the couriers and the rules that nearly transformed me into something inhuman. But some nights I wake gasping, certain I can hear tapping coming from inside my chest, my closet, beneath my bed. 2 weeks ago, I received a postcard. No return address, postmarked from a small town in Maine. Just 3 words in a handwriting I recognized as Sheriff Dawkins. It's happening here. I threw it away immediately. 3 days later, a package arrived. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Evening Shade, a small article noting that the town was being rebuilt after the tragic gas explosion that claimed several lives. The reconstruction was being funded by an anonymous benefactor. There was also a photograph. The rebuilt garage, looking exactly like mine, down to the faded Landry's auto repair sign. But the location was wrong. The feed store beside it wasn't Jackson's, and the mountains in the background weren't the Ozarks. The package contained one more item, a leather-bound journal, brand new, its pages empty except for the inside cover, where 7 rules were written in red ink. The same 7 rules I'd memorized during my time in Evening Shade. But there was an 8th rule now. If you hear someone calling your name from Evening Shade, never answer. I burned the journal that night in my backyard fire pit, watching the flames consume the leather and paper. As it burned, I could have sworn I saw faces in the fire. Marcus, Wendy, the courier in his perfect suit, smiling at me as if we shared a secret. The next morning, I found a fine black ash on my kitchen table, arranged in a perfect circle. Inside it lay a small key attached to a bone keychain, the key to a Honda Accord, according to the inscription. I haven't seen any black sedans in my neighborhood yet, but I've started checking the trunks of cars at the dealership before I work on them, just in case. I've also started looking at maps, searching for patterns, towns with similar layouts to Evening Shade. There are more than you'd think. Towns built on crossroads, towns with bridges over deep water, towns surrounded by ancient forests. Doorways waiting to be opened. Sometimes I catch my reflection in a window or mirror, and for a split second, my eyes are completely black, and increasingly, I find myself writing in my sleep. Notes, reminders, warnings. In handwriting that isn't mine. I don't know how much time I have before the transformation completes, before I become a vessel, a doorway for something waiting on the other side. But I've learned one thing from my time in Evening Shade. Some rules aren't meant to protect you from external threats. Some rules exist because the real danger is what you might become when you break them. And I've already broken too many.